So, as I was saying, happy Friday and welcome to the Planting Your Young Tree. This is a follow-up session from our 2024 Apple Grafting. Uh, might not recognize me. My name is Meredith Burks. I'm the communications director for Seed Savers Exchange. I've been helping a lot behind the scenes on as sort of the help desk, but I'm happy to introduce again somebody you should know, Lindsay Lee. He's our orchard and horticulture advisor. And we also have Jamie Hansen, Seed Savers Exchange's orchard manager on, and we're going to watch a short video. And then Lindsay and Jamie are here to answer any and all of your questions. We've blocked off an hour and a half of our time, so hopefully we'll get to everything. And if for some reason we don't, Jamie and Lindsay and I are happy to take questions via email or schedule anytime after the session is over. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and we'll start this video.
Okay, thanks for joining us here. This is the second session of the Grafting Your Own Apple Tree, and this is a session where we're going to talk about planting your tree out in the garden. I really stress that these trees go into a garden place close to home where you're going to see them every day. They're going to need a lot of care in the first half of this summer, and you're going to want to tend them regularly. So this is a garden space or a nursery bed at Seed Savers that we use to grow trees on in. It's planted with some clover cover crop that we're using as a green mulch. You can mulch with whatever material you want, but we are transitioning into this living mulch idea. Anyway, your trees have been in storage for a few weeks. And it's time to be planting them out. We like to see them go into the ground about 10 days or so before the frost-free date. And there's a lot of wiggle room there. I'd rather have you put them out a little early if we're going to, like this, it's going to be a cloudy day, a little bit on the cool side, instead of waiting till exactly 10 days and setting them out on an unusually warm sunny spring day, because they're coming out of the storage in a really they've been cool. They've not been drying out at all. So I'm going to show you what I have. I've put them in a bucket to really make sure they're hydrated. These two, they're buds or grafts off the same tree, and they're starting to grow, so they really need to go out into the garden. If they're any farther along than this and we had much of a chance of frost, I might not put them out yet, or I'd protect them some way. If you plant a young tree out and it's got leaves and we get a frost, well, you can damage them then. These are still in bud and they're pretty safe. Some of these others, here's one be very gentle with these because they may not be absolutely attached, but I'm ready to plant these out. I can see a little white callus tissue through that wrapper, the tape we put on them. I don't want to take that tape off. It needs to stay on there. So I'm going to leave them. But I'm seeing white callus tissue through there, so I think they're far enough along. Here's one that's a side graft, and that bud seems to have a little swell to it. That's great. That's kind of a perfect stage to be planting it out. So with that, I think we'll plant one. It's really pretty simple process. These are not big roots yet. You don't need a huge hole. You do want the top of the root system below the soil. And so I've dug just a straight wall here and hold this tree against it. Then I'm going to take my soil, crumble it up, and firm it. Now, these trees don't have any leaves on them yet, so watering, I think is kind of up to you. If I were going to plant 100 of these out, I probably wouldn't bother watering them. Our soil is nice and moist yet in this time of year, and there's no leaf pulling moisture out of that plant yet. So I have some water here today, so I'll pour a little on it. Another really nice way to add water slowly is to use a 5-gallon bucket and drill a 1/8-inch hole in one edge of it and let it just trickle. The inside of the bucket has to be really clean or that hole will plug up. But that puts water on extremely slowly. And the water tends to go down into the soil column instead of running out over the surface. Anyway, this tree will now establish new root and start to grow. It's going to, all these buds along the stem of the rootstock are going to sprout and want to grow. It's our job to rub all those off, and then when the buds on the cyanwood start to grow, I'm going to choose one of them, the strongest one, and save that and rub the rest of those off, because we want all the growth to grow out one shoot. With that, enjoy. I hope you have great luck with your grafts.
Okay. So that was our very short video, and I do have a couple of questions that were submitted by people who weren't able to join us live. If you have a question, you can either put it in the chat, or this is a small enough group, feel free to raise your hand. You can do that by finding the reactions button at the bottom of the Zoom screen, and I will call on you. So this is a question from Sacha. Where is the best place to purchase the sapling protectors that keep animals from chewing on them?
Amy, you want that or should I?
Sure, yeah. One of the most economical places to buy them is called A.M. Leonard, and you can purchase online. But really, any orchard supply and a lot of local like plant nurseries will have them. And yeah, they're usually like $1.50, $2 each.
Okay, so this is a question from Jeff. Given that they live in Zone 3B at 8,000 feet elevation in Colorado, they're concerned about the M7 rootstock that might not survive the winter. My other trees should have practiced this word before, Anatikova. Oh no.
Antonovka.
Antonovka.
Antonovka, thank you. Rootstock, and the climate keeps them in check. Thankfully, I have ample room on my 2-acre property, so the tree size is not a concern, nor am I in a hurry for production. Therefore, I'm thinking maybe I locate the graft union a bit below soil level and hope the scion roots a bit as well. Is my winter hardiness concern valid? And if so, what do you recommend?
Again, Jamie, you want that?
Sure. What zone did you say that they were in?
3A.
3B.
Oh,
3 in
3B.
Colorado.
I wouldn't be too worried. We've had people in northern Minnesota have find success with M7. If you did want a full-size tree, you certainly could plant it too deep, and the scion wood would likely root. The only thing is that you're giving up any benefit of a rootstock, right? So you will get your full-size tree, but there's not a lot of information on um, suckering, pest resistance, likely to sun scald. And so you're kind of taking a gamble, but if you're convinced you want big trees, that's always an option. But M7 should be fine. I wouldn't be too worried about M7.
Okay, and this question is from Joe. I noticed when I watched the recorded session from this year's grafting, Lindsay was not using rubber bands when securing scion wood to the root stock, only the clear tape. Is that the preferred method now?
Yes.
Yes.
The clear tape, the stretchy tape, budding tape has pretty much replaced the rubber bands. Because using rubber bands, we would also melt wax and paint them to really seal the air out with the rubber band use. And this tape is waxy, so it doesn't need to be painted with molten wax, and it saves a lot of mess and an extra step. Yeah, I was reading through these too, and I see one that asked about the tape itself and does it. You can just leave that tape on. It will degrade by the end of the first summer. It'll be flaking off. The buds can break right through it. There's a lot of power in a bud's shoots growth, and they can push right through that tape, unless you have like 4 layers of it maybe. But if you have a single layer, they probably go right through it. And certainly the sun, by the end of the summer, the sun will have broken it down enough that it's kind of flaking off.
Great. And that was all of the questions that I had from the pre-submitted. So I'm going to go to the chat here. This is from Natalie. What if our grafts aren't taking well? Should we plant the rootstocks and hope to graft new scions on them later?
You're right. Well, it's probably a little early to know if your grafts have taken. I have a bundle here that we grafted, and we'll pull a couple out and show you. None of them are showing any growth yet. And they shouldn't be really. If they've been stored cool enough, they shouldn't be bud swell. This bud swell shouldn't be taking place. So yes, by all means, plant them out. And I would bet on them making it. So I guess with that said, let me pull one of these out. If you did like we suggested, pack them back in this bag in their bedding. They should be damp. They shouldn't be so wet that they're moldy. And I'm going to untie this. So here we have 2 trees. I've got them wrapped together because they're the same. But I have no swelling of the bud, and I can't honestly really see that callus tissue line. I can't see through this tape well enough to see if it's oozing out the sides or not. It doesn't matter. It's the right time for us to plant them here in zone 4B. So I'm going to do that. I can at this time on the rootstock. I see buds all along it. I can go ahead and take my thumbnail and flick those off at planting time. And that's, there are secondary buds behind every one of these. They're still going to grow buds. You're going to have to go out there weekly or so and take them off through the first half of the summer. But that's you're just getting rid of the first option for a bud to grow. Another thing that's going to come up is the planting depth. So you can just see the roots on this. Here is the top root. And I want that top root to be about 2 inches below the surface of the soil, the finished grade, whatever, whatever, you know, I would not count mulch in that. I want the soil line to be 2 inches above that. If you're actually, once you've planted and the soil's firmed in and all, and you mulch, the mulch should come down to 0. Never bury the trunk of a tree in mulch. It should be nice and thick over the root zone, but when you get up to the trunk of the tree, it should go down to 0 right at the edge of the tree, so you don't cause problems with the bark at ground level. What was happening in the discussion before, the graft union is here. If the graft union were down lower and we planted it a little too deep, and that cyan variety we chose became in contact with the soil, it could grow its own root. And that would then negate the dwarfing effects and all the other properties of the rootstock. And it's basically what we'd call growing on its own root. And that's going to give you a full-size tree. Better have 40 feet of space for it. And you know, at this height, this one's 9 inches out of this above the root system. I'm not very afraid of it contacting the soil. And if you wanted it to bridge over the rootstock, you'd be planting it very deep. That could be done, but it's a pretty deep hole to put that little tree in. Anyway, next. Oh.
We can't hear you, Meredith.
Great. Thank you so much. Sorry. This is a great question from Kathy. I'll repeat it. How long should those white protectors stay on? Should they come off and then back on before winter? What is the timing of those protectors?
I've had so many young trees damaged by rabbits, and your enemy in the summer are rabbits and deer, and in the winter it's meadow voles or rodents that tunnel under the snow and eat the roots or eat the bark. So I've literally planted trees and had rabbits tear bark chunks out of it the first night. So I put them on the day I plant them. I probably wouldn't plant a tree unless I had a tree wrap there ready to go on. Those tree wraps come, and you know, you can get them in 18, 24, 36-inch lengths. You can snip them pretty easily and make short ones. So early on in the tree's life, you might want some 18 inches or even 12 inches. Yeah, those are perforated. They get a little air through them, so I'm not worried about leaving them on too much. In the days when I still use some of that paper wrap, well, that really should come off in summer because it doesn't breathe that much. But the white spiral wraps have a lot of holes in them and allow some air movement, so you don't get a lot of no risk of moldiness in there. It doesn't hurt to take them off once in summer and clean the trunk, simply to get rid of egg masses and cocoons, moth larvae and stuff like that. So because critters will find those as a refuge. There's a lot of insects that overwinter in loose slabs of bark. Well, that tree wrap looks like a loose slab of bark to them. There was also a question, I skipped over a part of a question earlier about if they don't take, and this is something we have to discuss. We don't like it when your trees don't take, but once in a while they don't. So you can go ahead and plant these. If the scionwood doesn't grow for you, but you get shoots from the root, you've got a couple options. One is to just save one shoot. I'd cut the tree back to one shoot and let that grow, and this time next year you could graft onto that again. Another option is to grow that up to a larger size. You could grow this tree up to where it had a 1.5 inch diameter and then do what we call top working. That's another technique. It's not too dissimilar from what we just did here, but you can actually graft the tree in place out the orchard with that top working method. I think we're going to have to record a little video on that sometime because we seem to talk about it a lot.
Yeah, thanks. Got two questions here from Frank. Are the trees sensitive to growing near walnut trees? And how much shade can apple trees tolerate?
Okay, walnut trees, having grown up in a yard that had 5 of them in the front yard, I have no real love for walnut trees. In a lawn yard setting or garden setting, they secrete a toxin that inhibits growth around them, and that's simply a defense mechanism so they can outcompete their neighbors out in the woods. So your apple trees are not going to like growing next to a walnut tree. Once in a while, people get by with it. A walnut tree root system is sparse, widely spaced roots. So there's a chance you could plant and be between roots and not have too much trouble. But in landscape settings, I've had trees that sat for 10 years and didn't grow. And in digging that tree up to replace it, we found a walnut root from 150 feet away growing right through the root zone of that tree, and it was inhibiting its growth. There was another identical tree in the same yard planted the same time that was huge, and we had another tree that didn't grow for 10 years. So walnut tree can severely limit growth of woody plants around them. That said, I've had some experience taking walnuts out, cutting them down so they're dead, and I've planted in those settings, and I think the tree has to be alive to really have a negative effect. So if you take the tree out, I'd go ahead and plant. What was the second part of the question?
How much shade can apple trees
they
tolerate?
They should have all the sun they can get. They will tolerate some shade. I've got, over the years, I've now and then had extra trees and I put them in along the edge of the woods. They survive. None of them are thriving. They really should get all the sun you can give them.
Great. All right. Going to combine a couple of these because I think they're similar questions. So this is, they're asking, do we take all the buds off the rootstock, but how many buds do we leave on the scion? Just one? And just asking for a review of, what needs to be removed.
Right. In the next session, we'll go over this again for you, but I like to let them get out 2-3 inches and decide which one's the strongest shoot and then reduce it to 1. I really want all the growth to go out 1 shoot. Oftentimes it's the lowest one, but not necessarily. That's why I let them all get started, and then I reduce them to 1 shoot.
And this is from Becky. I was hoping to plant mine in big mineral buckets for the first year. Will that be deep enough?
Yeah, in growing plants in pots, um, I am adamant that you don't want things in too much soil, just because you want a pot that's sized so that the root in short order will kind of fill the pot, and by doing that, it's going to be using the moisture you put in it. If I have a huge pot and a little tree in it, I end up with a lot of stagnant water that's not going anywhere in there, and I have a much greater chance of having root mold issues, root rot type issues if that soil stays soggy. Your potting mix should be airy. It should allow water to drain through pretty quickly. And so I caution you mostly about too big a pot. Too small a pot, you might have to water twice a day. So don't go there with it. The trees in front of me here, if I put those in a 2 or 3 gallon pot, that'd probably be appropriate.
Thank you. This is from Ren. Do we need to protect our little trees from cicadas? If so, how?
Jamie, do you know? Cicadas do not eat plants, do they? That's the larva
Not
form.
sure. Yeah.
Cicadas are just in the adult sexual stage of their lives. I don't think they eat anything.
Okay, great. Okay, question from last year's plantings. What do you do if the bud/leaf is coming out super close to the place where the rootstock joins the scion? How will you tell which it is?
Okay. So a lot of times on a graft union, I have here right down near the pointed tip of that scion wood, I've got a bud. And this one often is my strongest shoot. But it's pretty clear to see that this was the scion wood and this side is the rootstock. I'd say get down on your knees and look, because usually there's a color difference in the bark color. Your M7 bark is usually a little greenish, whereas a lot of what we sent you is probably a little reddish. I also, once they leaf out, it becomes very clear the leaves off the rootstock will be glossy, and usually the leaves off the scionwood will be fuzzy, a little bit pubescent. And yeah, once they've opened the leaf fully open, they're really easy to tell the difference between a rootstock leaf and a apple variety leaf.
Great. And this one is kind of a similar question about selecting what to keep. This is from Jono. When the scion wood starts to grow out of the buds, if you have 2 or 3 buds growing, how do you select which one to keep? Is it closest to the rootstock or longest leaves? And when does one choose a single bud to remove them?
Yeah. Okay. Similar, but I let all of them come, and I'll choose the strongest one off. If they're all the same, I'll prioritize the closest one to the rootstock.
Great. Okay, this is maybe a relationship question from Natalie. How do you keep them in the fridge without your spouse mushing them and disrupting the grafts? I like that question. Get a new fridge that's just for your new hobby of grafting trees.
All right. I grabbed these this morning. They were down in my root cellar, but I told myself that in a year's time I should just put them in my garage for the time being, because my garage is a nice, cool, even temperature, and I'm not getting in and out of. I can put them in a corner where they're not going to be bothered. Yeah, I realize that a lot of fridges have a high traffic volume. Um, so um, they don't have to be in a fridge. Any place that's roughly the right temperatures would be appropriate. If you had to, you could bury them in a pile of mulch for the time being, and just mark it well so you can find them. But make sure the mulch isn't heating up, actively composting. But that would work too. Any place that's cool, moist, even temperatures, not swinging temperatures, but even consistent temperatures.
Great. And we also just have some people commenting that all of their grafts seem to be doing well. That's from Becky. All 5 have new buds. This is from Kimberly. How far do you plant them apart? Also, if we can't plant them until the end of next week, do we leave them wrapped in the plastic with mulch, or do we place them in a bucket of water with the 1/8 hole for drainage?
Well, I would only soak them in a bucket like that for a day. Go before you plant, no more than a day, or maybe even just overnight. Yeah, I would keep them stored in the plastic wrap with the bedding. This is the shredded newspaper around them. That's fine. Was there another part to that?
Um, Asking about the bucket, placing them in a bucket of water with an 1/8 inch hole for drainage.
Yeah, the hole in the bucket idea is just a way to slowly water a tree. And it's really a lovely thing when you get a slow drip of water, gravity pulls it down into the soil, and that builds up water weight in the soil column, and that pushes it even deeper. And it's a trick I use to get a really good deep watering of the whole root system. You can use this on established trees too. And I think of this, if I dump a bucket of water on the ground, it spreads out this far. Well, that's not going to go very deep into the soil. It's going to wet the top ½ inch, maybe. And so water that's in the top ½ inch of soil is really prone to just go ahead and evaporate back out. So you're wasting a lot of water doing that kind of thing. So when you put water on, just think about drip irrigation systems. Very slowly, just a drop at a time, that water will go down into the root zone and does a marvelous job. In my soils, we have heavy fine particle clay soils. I don't need to do that very often. If I do a thorough job of watering, I'm done for a long time until we have a really serious dry spell.
Great. Okay, so you did sort of touch on, you might not know if your grafts have taken or not, but this is a question from Christopher. If the grafts fail, can we just regraft again in a month or two, assuming the scion is still back in the back of the fridge?
Probably not. The next opportunity to graft on this root would be after the middle of summer. We do a thing called tea bud grafting or bud grafting. You'd have to find new scion wood for that because we use that same year's new growth for that, and we don't have a video on that either, so you'd have to look that up. But again, I'd have the confidence to think your trees are going to grow.
Great. This is from Vade now. I noticed that the cambium layer of the grafted scion is exposed at the top of the union with the rootstock, though it's wrapped securely with a grafting tape. I've been thinking about regrafting it, but I'm also concerned that there is a good connection that I'd destroy by starting over. Will the scion die if any of the cambium is exposed? Is it too late to try regrafting?
I would go with what you've got. If any union has been made, it will take. I think that I always tell people that 85, 95% cambial contact is great. So if there's just a little tip of green showing over the top of the rootstock, that's not going to be a problem. There have even been times when I've grafted where we've just lined up one side or the other. We barely had over 50% contact, and they still can take. So you got a little wiggle room there. I think it's going to work for you, and I would not take it apart and regraft.
Great. So Joan has 2 extra rootstocks from a local nursery. What do I do with them?
So they haven't been grafted yet, I take it. So, well, this depends on where you are, but I sit here in zone 4B, and I have grafted on May 1st, held those for 2 weeks, planted them out, and had them take. So this is pushing the end of the season, but I would get to it.
Yeah. Is there any storage that they could do if they're not able to graft it in the next couple of weeks, or
Plant them.
just plant them? Yep. Save them. Okay. This is from Ed. When is the graft sturdy enough to tolerate pruning?
Okay, for this first season, you're going to do very little pruning, except for to rub the buds off, and that's something we do without a tool. When I get a shoot coming out here, I can put my thumb on it, push it sideways, and it pops right off. I hardly call that pruning, but I guess it technically would be. Certainly by the last half of the summer, this is going to be a pretty darn sturdy union. But until then, I'm going to be pretty gentle with it. So when I'm rubbing these excess shoots off the scionwood, I'm going to grab that, hold it in place, and rub the extra shoots off, just so I'm not pushing hard sideways on the whole graft. These things in here right now are joining through that callus tissue that's formed in there. It's still not a really strong union yet until you see a barky growth all the way around that. I would treat it gently. Barky, that's a new word. Bark-like, I guess.
Okay, those are all of the questions in the chat. If anyone watching has a question that they just want to come off mute for, feel free.
Jamie, when's our next session?
I believe our next session is May 31st. Yes, May 31st, 1 to 2:30 Central Time.
Yeah, and that one, by then we should, is when you'll have shoots growing on your trees, and we'll talk a lot more about, the process of keeping those excess shoots cleaned off and growing it on for the summer.
Great. And actually, we do have a few more questions in the chat, but go ahead, Troy, if you want to come off mute. I see your hand raised.
Yeah, the graft that I made, one of them got bumped and got jostled. I've moved it back into place and wrapped it up, and it got jostled really early. I'm wondering, I'm keeping an eye on it. Is it chances that one's not going to make it, or?
Well, it has a chance of making it. It depends a little bit on the circumstances. If it got jostled and you didn't notice it for a few days, I'm afraid I would have gone ahead and made a new cut.
I noticed it right away and moved it back right away and retaped it.
Well, I think you're good.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. I have a question here from Nikki. They say, my husband didn't receive the link for the original class, did what he could with the recorded videos, but missed something about the after grafting, and he planted them outside immediately. Is there any hope for them? They've been outside for 2 weeks.
Yeah, there's always hope, especially if it's been mild the last 2 weeks wherever you live. If it hasn't, they could have, what happens if we hit high temperatures and these aren't really healed yet, the buds on the cyanwood would say, oh, it's warm, I'm going to leaf out, but then there's nothing to supply new sap to them. And you'd know pretty quickly if they leaf out and shrivel right away, they're not connected yet. If they leaf out and stay green, you're in luck. If they don't leaf out at all, but leaf out only below, well, then that cyanwood probably dried out in the process. But I think there's a chance. We've been really mild here, and I haven't had many really cold nights that would damage tissue, and there's not been that many really warm days either.
This is from Rachel. What do you recommend using for tags that will last?
Mapping.
Yeah.
Mapping. And then you got to put the map someplace where you can find it. But we've been using metal embossed tags. Works. The plastic tags, I think Jamie mentioned this last time, permanent markers like Sharpies are not permanent. They might last a year. On a plastic tag, especially if it's got a textured side, a rougher side, a nice soft lead pencil, a graphite pencil, like 2B or 4B, will make a label on plastic that lasts quite well. I know I've heard John Bunker talk about cutting up white soap bottle, like dish detergent bottles, and using pencil on those. But you got to, if it leaves a good mark, it'll stay on there better than a liquid marker like a Sharpie.
Yeah, that's great. To me, that's kind of counterintuitive, but that's a really good tip to use the graphite pencil.
Old technology, but graphite sticks around.
Yep. No, that does make sense. This is from Jim. What is your preferred method for grafting?
They're all kind of fun. I do a lot of this, the bench grafting that we've taught here in this class. I come from a nursery background. I've worked my whole life in nurseries and have done some field production using bud grafting. Most of your commercial trees are bud grafted because it takes less time per tree. Your take isn't usually as high, but it's faster. If you're counting minutes per tree with paid employees, well, that makes a difference. There are actually crews that travel around the country and graft trees for nurseries that are very efficient. But summertime budding is probably the most used grafting method on fruit trees in the country. I've done some top working, and that's really fun. And again, I'll promise sometime in the future we'll get a video done on that so that you can learn about it. I'm sure it's not too hard to find stuff about that on an internet search, but they're all kind of fun. I just as a hobbyist, the bench grafts, the whip and tongue grafts and side grafts are pretty useful.
Mhm. Jamie, do you have a favorite way to graft?
I think they all have their place or their purpose, but whip and tongue for sure in terms of bench grafting. There's also something called cleft grafting or saddle grafting, which is also a type of bench grafting, but the cut's just a little bit different. And sometimes I'll use that, but I would definitely say whip and tongue, what we learned, is my preferred method. And top working is always fun because you can get multiple varieties on one tree if you'd like to.
Great, thanks. Let's see. So Kathy asked, where can you buy rootstock? And I will say, Rachel mentioned Fedco in the as a reply. Is there any other recommendations?
Yeah, so Fedco, Cummins Nursery, Rain Tree, and we personally buy from a place called Copenhagen, but it's only available in bundles of 50. So if you're going to plant a whole orchard, I'd recommend them. Otherwise, really any nursery tree supplier.
Great, thank you. Um, this is from Frank. If the plan is to replant after a year or two, how far apart do they need to be?
Yeah, somebody asked that earlier. In a
Okay.
nursery bed, I'll go 18 inches or 2 feet apart. Mostly it's that I want to have space to get in, get down on my knee, look at them close, and work with them. If we put them closer to that, your chance of bumping the neighbor is too great. So 18 inches is nice. 2 feet, that's a lot of space to maintain between them.
Yeah. Okay, great. This is from Emily. When is the best time of year to do bud grafting?
Okay, this depends a lot on your climate where you live, but you do bud grafting. There's a couple of things that need to be right, and that is the bark needs to slip, meaning I can cut under the bud and over the top and pop the bark off. So the bark in midsummer, say mid-July, possibly to the end of August, the bark slips. It'll come right off off the trunk. So the bark has to slip, and the bud needs to be mature. Now, an immature bud in the summertime is green, as the leaf. But as they mature, they turn brown or reddish. And so I wait kind of late into the season for that to happen. So those buds are fully mature before I bud graft. For us right here, it's yeah, usually into August or even the last part of August. That bud stays on the tree till the following spring before it grows.
And it looks like there's a couple more recommendations on where to find rootstock in the chat as well. Maple Valley Orchard, One Green Earth is still selling rootstock. This might be the last week they send for the season. So yeah, I do think it is getting very close to the end of the rootstock season. Here is one from Sean. How do you prepare scion wood for shipping during the summer for bud grafting?
We don't, Seed
Yep.
Savers itself hasn't
Yep.
been in the habit of shipping scion wood in summer. We just have that the bench grafting season set up for that. So we ship in the late winter. if you're not too far away, you could probably arrange to come down and collect some cyanwood. Jamie's nodding. But as far as shipping, I've had summer cyanwood shipped in the past and had mixed results with it. And so I'm a little cautious about that. I mean, you'd have to cut all the leaves off, package it up in damp paper or whatever, and ship it cooled, so some ice packs in there or something. I think that's to be a lot, but
yeah, Jamie, can you maybe speak a little bit about the Scionwood sort of season for Seed Savers Exchange and the exchange?
Yeah, so the exchange is updated for Cyanwood every November, and our order goes from November to March. And usually it's late March, but depending on how the weather is, sometimes we'll cut it off a little bit earlier. So the exchange you can find at exchange.seedsavers.org. It's not the same as just going to the Seed Savers website. You'll be popped into our catalog. Um, so yeah, November to March, and we have anything that's been DNA tested or confirmed correct will be posted on there. But we do have a lot of different varieties, and if you're really set on getting a certain thing, you can always email us and we can set that up for you. The only thing to know is that if you order from emailing me and not from the exchange, we can't guarantee that the cultivar is necessarily true to type. So, we haven't confirmed that. But typically, yeah, the exchange, November to March, and there's an order form and everything on there.
Yep. And I just dropped a link in the chat for everyone to directly to the exchange. And we are in the process of revamping that platform, which we're very excited about. So hopefully we're making it even more user-friendly for people to find what they're looking for. Okay. This is from Rushery. I got a Tolman Sweet, Man, Hamilton, Pewaukee, and Wolf River Scions from you. Which is your recommendation for the sweetest, most flavorful for eating fresh? I don't know much about apples, so appreciate your expertise. So, Jamie or Lindsay?
In terms of eating fresh, out of the ones that you got, I would highly recommend Hamilton. It's a visitor favorite here at Seed Savers. It's one of the trees right as you walk into the orchard, and we get great comments on that one. Yeah, Pewaukee's more of a cooking apple. Tolman Sweet's all-purpose. Out of the ones you got, I would definitely say Hamilton for fresh eating.
Great. Thank you. All right, I believe I've gone through all of the chat questions, but we will just give everyone kind of another minute here to see if there's any other questions. I will just mention again, our next session is Friday, May 31st at the same time, so 1 p.m. Central. The topic is going to be disbudding and taping up, similar format. Where we'll do a live Q&A. If you have questions, if you're not able to attend and ask your question live, feel free to send in your questions to me and we'll have them asked in person. I am recording this, so this video is going to go out as soon as I'm able to upload it on YouTube, so probably no later than Monday, so be on the lookout for that. And it looks like, okay, a couple more questions here, which is great. So Kathy says that I might have mixed up my scion for Tolman Sweet. Is there any way to get a rootstock and scion to replace it?
Yeah, so we're all out of cyanwood for the year. You can still, even if you mix it up, you can still plant your rootstock and reuse it next year, but you would have to order through the exchange like we had just talked about. And you could really pick anything. But yeah, unfortunately, we're all out for this season.
Okay, and Jim has a question about what if we have a spring drought? Is there anything with watering that you want to recommend?
Linda, you can take this one.
water, water, water. Yes, we've been dry here in the Midwest. We're getting over that a little bit today. but you never know. If we go back into a dry cycle, we may need to water. These are deeper rooted plants than your average head of lettuce, so they don't need it as often. But if you stick a finger down through the top couple inches of soil and it's dry, go ahead and water it. This is such a touchy thing. If you're in my sister-in-law lives in a sandy soil and could water every day and not hurt anything. And in my heavy clay soils, if I watered every day, I would drown my plants. So you kind of got to gauge it according to your soils, but watch the plant. It'll droop if it's dry, and if it does that, for sure, get some water on it.
Great.
Yeah, I can see that. Walnut trees, it's the black walnut that's the culprit. Yeah.
Yep. Okay. Well, if we've managed to answer all of your questions, then I'm gonna let us end a little bit early. And again, we'll hopefully see everyone May 31st, which is a Friday, and we'll talk about disbedding and taping up. So thank you, everyone. Thank you, Jamie. Thank you, Lindsay. Appreciate you sharing your time and knowledge with us.